The film begins with a young man named Gao lying unconscious at the bottom of a cliff in a wrecked car. Crossing, a native village girl, stands back and watches the car. Gao wakes up and stumbles out of the car, stumbling across stony terrain. He's only a few meters away from the crash site when Crossing comes up behind him and knocks him out with a stone. The setting shifts to 8 hours before the horrifying car accident. As the trio stands on a sidewalk, Gao, a gem hunter, is joined by Shauna, his dealer, and Kin, his technician. There, Gao spots 2 sketchy men in a car closely watching him from down the street, and immediately realizes that they are hired thugs. Gao says goodnight to Shauna and Kin before getting into his car and driving away. He expected the men to start their engine and follow him closely. Gao accelerates and speeds away, resulting in a high-speed chase that leads to the accident. Gao awakens in the present and finds himself in a primitive but strange village. Women are the dominant gender in this community as they hunt and provide for their families, while men do chores and care for the children. Fathers maintain the home and cook the meals, while mothers serve as guards and soldiers to protect their husbands. The village is a remote location that is completely cut off from the outside world due to lack of technology and scientific knowledge. Gao is also surprised to discover that Crossing is the queen of the tribe. Gao initially dismisses her and believes the villagers are just nerdy cosplayers with fantastic costumes and a perfect setup. He curses at Crossing and the other women, which irritates the lovely tribe leader. Crossing is enraged by Gao's attitude and confines him in a wooden cage as punishment. Gao eventually realizes they are real people and decides to return to the city as soon as possible. However, Inhei, the tribe's astrologer, informs Gao that he is not permitted to leave the village without the permission of Crossing. Gao begs Crossing to let him out of the cage and drive him to his car after a few hours. Crossing, despite his reservations, decides to have mercy on him and obliges. Gao searches his car for useful supplies as the two return to the crash site. Gao discovers a metal bat in the trunk and enjoys swinging it around. He accidentally hits Crossing on the head, causing her to collapse on the floor. Gao seizes the golden opportunity to flee and runs into the nearby woods while wearing a backpack. A few minutes later, the car's fuel tank begins to leak, and Crossing is suddenly surrounded by a ring of blazing flames. The villagers notice the fire and rush to the scene, pouring buckets of water on it to put it out. Gao hears the villagers screaming from the woods and feels bad about abandoning Crossing. He rushes to the scene, pours a bucket of water on himself, and enters the raging ring, carrying Crossing out. The car explodes as they leave the scene, and the duel ends in a nearby pond, much to the relief of the villagers. Gao returns to the village and discovers his phone in his backpack in the following scene. He plays a song on it, which draws the attention of Crossing as she rushes into the room. Crossing is terrified of the strange device and attempts to destroy it, but Gao assures her that it is harmless. He hands her his earphones, and the two listen to music together as Crossing falls asleep. Gao lays a sleeping Crossing in bed before frantically searching the room for a map that will lead him back to the city. Gao discovers a sapphire gemstone in the room and decides to ask Crossing about it when she wakes up. The following morning, Crossing informs him that the sapphire was a gift from her late mother. In exchange for the stone, a greedy Gao offers her a bowl of instant noodles, a novel, and even his phone. Crossing, on the other hand, refuses to part with the gem, claiming that it is her most prized possession. Gao is dissatisfied, but decides to steal the gem instead. Later that day, Crossing invites Gao to meet her in an open field at night to watch the stars. As Crossing sheepishly smiles and leaves his shed, Gao accepts the offer. That night, the couple lay on the grass and gazed at the stars. To Gao's surprise, Crossing pounces on him and attempts to strip him naked. He knocks her down, and the two have a heated argument. Gao is astounded to learn that in the village, watching the stars means having sex. As a result, Crossing pounced on him. Gao dashes to the village to flee, with Crossing hot on his tail. When they return to the village, Crossing is furious with Gao and imprisons him. Gao tells Crossing that he didn't realize the phrase had a hidden meaning and took it at face value. He also claims that where he comes from, people express their romantic feelings in different ways, such as confessing their love when it snows. Crossing finally understands Gao, but she still keeps him in the cell while she returns to her shed. Back in the city, Sam and Kin search for Gao with no success. They search the road where his car swerved down the cliff but come up empty-handed. Kin searches the area with a drone, but a magnetic field disrupts the flight and causes Kin's monitor to go blank. When the two arrive home, they run into Lian, a businesswoman with whom Gao has a contract. The contract requires Gao to meet with Lian every 15 days or face a fine of $60 million. It's been 13 days since he went missing, and Lian has come to find him. Zena lies about Gao going to the mountains and returning soon. Lian isn't convinced, but she gives the duo 48 hours to find Gao before acting. Crossing returns to the village and takes Gao to the woods. As she pours a bucket of chicken blood on him, Crossing confesses her love for him and asks him to marry her. Last night, Crossing apparently misheard him and thought he said blood instead of snow, as both words sound similar in Chinese. Gao is enraged and walks away in frustration, only to be caught in a trap shortly after. Gao begs Crossing to release him from the trap. However, Crossing asks him to accept her wedding proposal first, and a defeated Gao eventually agrees. Gao discovers one of Qin's drone blades in the bushes on their way back. When he notices this, he realizes that his friends are looking for him and decides to flee the village as soon as possible. Gao and Crossing talk that night and decide to marry the next day. Gao inquires about the village terrain and discovers a secret cave in the forest. He believes the cave is an exit from the village and plans to use it to flee. Gao also discovers the village's wine reserve and begs Crossing to take him there. She agrees, and the two proceed to the village's central pantry. Gao slips some sleeping pills into the wine barrel without her knowledge as a ruse to knock out all the villagers during their wedding. Later, when the couple returns to Gao's room, Crossing presents him with her sapphire stone as an early wedding gift. Gao feels guilty, but he still collects the gem. The couple has their wedding ceremony the next night and observes the tribe's unique rites as Crossing gets down on one knee and confesses her love for Gao. Gao agrees to take her as his wife. The villagers then sing and play a love song while the newlyweds dance in unison. Gao proposes a toast and encourages the villagers to drink their respective bowls of wine to conclude the feast. The unwitting natives drink the drugged drink, but Gao throws his away when no one is looking. The villagers fall asleep a few hours later, while Gao packs his belongings and leaves the village. He walks through the woods until he comes to the cave, which connects to the outside world. Gao enters the dark cave and begins his journey to the city, determined. He finally makes it out of the cave the next morning and races to the top of a mountain, smiling as he sees a nearby road. As the 48-hour deadline approaches, Lian arrives at Gao's house with her men. Lian inquires of Zena and Qin about Gao's whereabouts, but they reveal that they have no idea. Hearing this, Lian proposes to Zena a contract that would give her ownership of the house. Zena refuses to sign the papers, but Lian forces her to. As Zena is forced to sign the paper with her thumbprint, the businesswoman instructs her men to hold the duo hostage. Gao, fortunately, bursts through the front door just in time to stop them. While Gao is speaking with Lian, Qin takes advantage of the distraction and swallows the signed contract. Finally, the businesswoman leaves the house, promising to stay in touch. Gao freshens up and shares a meal with his friends after she leaves, who wonder where he's been the entire time. Gao wants to keep the villagers safe from the outside world, so he dodges their questions and lies to his friends. Gao shows them the sapphire gem he received from Crossing after their meal. The pair is taken aback by the stone, as they haven't seen a sapphire of that size in years. Finally, Gao hands the gem to Zena, along with a village soil sample for testing. Later that day, the trio pays a visit to Gao's uncle, Wen, at a nursing home and dresses up as clowns to entertain the elderly residents. The villagers awaken in the following scene and frantically search the area for Gao. Crossing is heartbroken by his disappearance and soon realizes that he fled with the gem. She decides to go to the city to look for him, despite her sadness. Yunhei, the village astrologer, initially opposes her journey to the city. When Crossing begs her, Yunhei leads her to the cave's entrance and warns her to be wary of the city people before the queen departs. When Crossing arrives in town, she meets Yi Tian, a well-known astrology social media influencer looking for a female co-host. Crossing's unusual attire and odd behavior piques his interest, and he offers to hire her. Yi requests her manager, but a perplexed Crossing simply hands him a card that Gao left in the village. Yi discovers a number on it and follows it to a nearby nursing home. Yi drives Crossing to the revealed location to look for Gao at her request. Gao spots Crossing from a distance and runs before she sees him when they arrive at the nursery. He hides behind some bushes and watches as Crossing searches for him. Crossing eventually gives up and walks towards the house exit, but she turns around as soon as she hears Gao sneeze from a nearby bush. Gao appears in his clown costume, but Crossing does not recognize him and simply watches him jump away. Crossing quickly joins Yi in the car, and the two drive away from the house. While conversing, Yi informs an uninformed Crossing that clowns aren't real creatures, but rather human masks. Crossing is taken aback by the revelation and concludes that the strange clown she saw at home was, in fact, Gao. She begs Yi to take her back to the nursery, and the media influencer does so. Unfortunately, when they arrive at the nursery, Gao and his friends have already left. leaving Crossing disappointed once more. He offers to drive Crossing to his house, but the tribe leader declines and sits on the sidewalk in front of the nursery, declaring that she will wait for Gao to return. He tries desperately to persuade her to leave, but she refuses and even sits in the pouring rain. Meanwhile, Gao feels guilty for hiding from Crossing and asks Qin to locate her. Qin informs him a few minutes later that Crossing and Yi are still at the nursing home. Gao thanks Qin for his assistance and drives back to the nursery. Gao notices Crossing sitting in the rain with Yi next to her. He pulls in front of the couple and rolls down his window. Crossing is startled to see him and grabs him by the shirt. Gao begs her not to punch him and tells her an absurd lie about it being illegal to hit people in the rain. Because Crossing is gullible, she believes him and gets into his car as he drives her back to his house. When they arrive, Crossing points her crossbow at him, but Gao calms her down and takes the weapon away. Crossing requests that Gao return her sapphire. The cunning gem hunter, on the other hand, distracts her by offering her a cake. Crossing tries the sugary treat and quickly forgets about the stone as she viciously munches on it, savoring its strange flavor. Crossing spends the rest of the day exploring the house as she adjusts to her new surroundings after she finishes her meal. She fires an arrow at the television set, mistaking it for a monster, but Gao explains that it's just a toy that won't harm her. Crossing is fascinated by the modern world and celebrates by swinging a punctured feather pillow around the house, making a shambles. The next day, Zena pays a visit to Gao and is astounded to find the living room in shambles. Crossing approaches her shortly after, while eating a bowl of instant noodles. Zena seizes the dish from Crossing and demands to know who she is and how she is related to Gao. Crossing is enraged by Zena's behavior and grabs her by the face as the dealer screams in terror. The scream wakes Gao up and he rushes downstairs to find out what happened. He discovers Zena wrapped in a blanket, her mouth covered with a cloth. Gao quickly frees her and is shocked to learn that Crossing is to blame. Zena is enraged and demands to know who the strange-looking girl is. Gao immediately grabs Zena and leads her upstairs to his room. There, he tells the truth about what happened when he went missing. Crossing, according to Gao, is the queen of a remote matriarchal village where women rule and men are submissive. Zena initially doubts him, but when Gao shows her Crossing's native crossbow, she realizes he's telling the truth. Crossing in the living room hears a knock on the window and is surprised to see Yi outside the house. She rushes to the door and tries unsuccessfully to open it. Crossing finds the door handle with Yi's help but has to use brute force to turn it. As a result, it's broken. She eventually gives up trying to open the door and breaks it completely. When Gao and Zena hear the crashing door, they rush downstairs to find out what happened. Gao is furious when he discovers Yi in his home and drags him out before closing his gate. Yi, on the other hand, refuses to leave and reveals that he knows Crossing is from a remote island. Gao is taken aback by this and threatens Yi to stay away from her as he returns to the house with Crossing. Gao takes Crossing to a fashion store the next day to get some new clothes. Crossing dresses up while Gao steps away to give her some privacy. Outside, Gao is surprised to see Lian approaching from a distance and is terrified that she will discover Crossing. As a result, he immediately hides behind a wall and keeps a close eye on the stern woman as she enters the store.